It's my blessing that you live off me. Never forget your place, parasite.
You came home, you.
No. I love the person I thought you were, but the woman standing in front of me now is someone else entirely.
The clock ticked.
A scream echoed through the luxurious mansion in cantonments. A steaming pot of boiling water was poured out. The wrinkled skin of the disabled mother, shriveled as a cry of pain, tore through the silence. The daughter-in-law, dressed in a white silk gown, her eyes cold as ice, tilted the pot once more. And then the door burst open so hard that the white curtains flew. A man in a black suit, just back from a long business trip in Paris, froze at the doorway. "What are you doing?" "That's my mother." The pot crashed to the marble floor, boiling water splattering everywhere. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. The mother's eyes were still open, staring at her son, not with anger, but with sorrow. Some wounds don't live on the skin, they live inside the heart. A deep, gentle voice narrates, "Sometimes we chase wealth so far that we forget where we came from. But fate always finds a way to bring us back to witness the very fire we once used to burn others." You are watching African Tales, where every story is a mirror of mercy, love, and conscience. Comment where you're watching from: Accra, Dakar, Abuja, Cape Town, Toronto, Sydney. Type "Thank you, Mom" to honor the woman who once sacrificed everything for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Afrolee's Bite. To watch the full emotional and shocking story, and to discover the fate of the cruel daughter-in-law and the lesson that silenced the world. Listen closely, because beyond that pot of boiling water, it wasn't just skin that burned, it was a heart consumed by greed. By the murky canal of Old Fadama, where wooden houses float unsteadily on the water, and morning smoke seeps through the cracks of every plank, people often see Mama Adwa, her silver hair like threads of smoke, sitting quietly in her rusty wheelchair. She would sit still, turning the old wheel with trembling hands, her eyes gazing toward the marketplace where people sold dried fish, charcoal, and palm oil, the very things that once kept her alive. In her youth, Mama Adwoa was the strongest woman in all of Old Fadama. She carried sacks of charcoal, jerry cans of oil, and bundles of firewood, pushing her old cart across shaky wooden bridges. She raised her only son, Kofi, with sunburned hands and an unshakable faith that the poor may be born in the mud, but they don't have to die in it. Every morning she woke before the roosters, lighting a fire from the ashes of the previous night, cooking cassava porridge while whispering her prayer. "Lord, give my son a bright path and the wisdom to find his way back." Kofi was a brilliant boy, eyes clear as rainwater after a storm. She used to say, "When you smile, my son, even the smoke forgets to sting my eyes." The day Kofi won a scholarship to study in England, Old Fadama exploded with joy. Drums, songs, and dancing filled the floating village. People proudly called her Mama University. She smiled through tears. "He's gone, but my heart will walk beside him." Yet the years that followed were cruel. An accident on the bridge left her paralyzed from the waist down. Her old wooden cart became her home. Her charcoal stove, her only warmth during rainy nights. Neighbors helped when they could, but her world grew smaller with each season. Every evening, she sat by the doorway, watching people pass. One day, a boy selling roasted yams stopped and asked Grandma, "Why doesn't anyone visit you?" She smiled, eyes far away. People only return when they remember their roots. But when they forget, all they see is dust on the road. At night, she turned on her old radio, the only gift Kofi had ever sent home. Whenever she heard news about oil companies and wealthy businessmen, she would smile faintly. Maybe my son is somewhere like that now. Then one day, a postman knocked on her door with a letter bearing the name Gold Coast Oil. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photograph, Kofi standing beside the president, dressed in a white suit, smiling proudly. Below it read, "For a brighter Ghana." Her tears fell onto the photograph, mixing with charcoal dust on the table. She whispered, "Your light is shining so bright, my son. But do you still remember the little flame that once kept you warm?" Then came the rainy nights. The canal swelled. The damp smell filled her house. She wrapped herself in a blanket, listening to thunder in the distance, softly singing, "If you ever return, I'll tell you about the fire that never went out." Until one morning, the sound of a car stopping outside her hut. 2 men in black suits appeared. "Madame Adwa." "Yes, that's me. We've been ordered to take you to Osu. Your son is now a billionaire, Mr. Kofi Kumi." She froze. 10 years of waiting. And at last, her son remembered. Tears rolled down her trembling hands. The old wheelchair rolled slowly toward the gate, its wooden wheels creaking over the wet planks. The whole of Old Fadama stopped to watch. Everyone knew that a poor mother was finally being taken to paradise. But what Mama Adwa didn't know was that the place awaiting her was not paradise, but a palace of pride, where a wealthy wife would see her as nothing more than a stain on marble floors. And within that grand mansion, a pot of boiling water was waiting to test the heart of a son who once swore he would take his mother to where she truly belongs. A glossy black Range Rover turned through the automatic gates of the Osu estate. The Accra sunlight glinted off its windows, sliding across the marble statues at the entrance. When the car stopped, Mama Adwa sat motionless in her wheelchair, eyes wide like a child lost in another world. Before her stood a mansion that blazed like a palace, white walls, blue-tiled roofs, and tall marble columns carved with precision. From the back garden drifted the faint scent of lavender, so distant from the charcoal smoke that had once wrapped around her life. Kofi stepped out of the car, his black suit, immaculate sunglasses reflecting the evening sun. He bent down to hug his mother, his voice trembling with pride. "Mama, I told you one day you'd live like a queen." She smiled faintly, her wrinkled hand resting on his chest. "You've done well, my son, but I only hope you still remember the smell of charcoal in our kitchen." From the balcony above, Yara, Kofi's wife, appeared, her white silk dress flowing her perfume, expensive and sharp. Her eyes swept over Mama Adwa quickly, then paused on the rust stains of the wheelchair. "Welcome, Mama," she said in her crisp British accent. "We've prepared a room for you. Sorry, it's downstairs. The upper floor isn't ideal for wheelchairs." The words were polite, but the distance in her eyes was colder than porcelain. Mama Adwa was wheeled into a room at the end of the hall. It was small, tiled, and cold white, with a modern painting on the wall. No window to the garden, just a single pot of purple orchids on the table. It was meant to be elegant, but it lacked a heartbeat. That first night, the dinner table glowed under candlelight. Glasses of deep red wine shimmered. Kofi spoke about oil deals, investments, and million-dollar contracts. Mama Adwa sat quietly at the corner, her frail hands trembling as she held her spoon. She tried to tell a story about Old Fadama, about the neighbor who helped her light the stove during hard years. But before she could finish, Yara interrupted Mama. "That sounds lovely, but Kofi and I have to discuss the Paris partnership tonight." Silence fell. The soft clinking of forks on porcelain plates filled the air. Kofi forced a smile and said gently, "Tomorrow, Mama." She nodded, eyes reflecting candlelight like small, trembling tears. Days turned into quiet isolation. Each morning, a young maid placed her food at the door and disappeared. Each night, laughter echoed from the living room. The sound of glasses clinking, jazz music, and sometimes Yara's voice calling out, "Honey, don't let your mother's medicine smell stick to the furniture. It gives me headaches." One afternoon while Kofi was away at a meeting, Yara entered the room, her heels striking the marble floor with dry, sharp clicks. "You know, Mama," she began softly, but with a blade beneath her tone. "This house thrives on refinement. The smell of charcoal or ointment doesn't belong here." Mama Adwa stayed silent, her thin hands resting on the wheels. "If that's how you feel," she said calmly, "I can sit outside near the mango tree." "Suit yourself," Yara replied. From that day on, she was almost forgotten. Separate meals, quiet nights. The wind through the balcony rails sounded like the sigh of someone no longer welcome. But what hurt her most wasn't the coldness. It was her son's eyes. Whenever she called him, he still smiled, but there was a glass wall between them. He no longer sat to hear her stories, no longer kissed her hands the way he did in Old Fadama. His words had become measured, precise, like a man talking to shareholders, not his mother. One rainy night, she heard thunder rumble and smelled the wet earth seeping through the cracks of her door. She tried to wheel herself to the porch, hoping to feel a few drops of Accra rain, the rain that once mixed with charcoal dust. But as she reached the threshold, the maid blocked her way. Madam said, "You mustn't go outside, the floor will get dirty." Mama Adwa smiled softly. "My dear, rain doesn't dirty the earth. It only washes away the dust of those who forget." That night, Kofi returned late. The scent of cologne lingered on his suit. She looked at him a long moment and asked quietly, "Kofi, are you happy?" He hesitated. "Of course, Mama. I have everything a man could dream of." She nodded, her fading smile trembling. "Everything. But can you still smell the charcoal in your heart?" He said nothing, just bent down to kiss her hand, a gesture he hadn't made in years. But that kiss felt colder than ever. As he left the room and the door closed behind him, Mama Adwa looked at the orchid on her table. The flower was blooming beautifully, but its roots were trapped in porcelain without soil. She thought to herself, "Perhaps that is my son's life too." She sighed softly. Outside, rain fell upon the blue-tiled roof, and somewhere in the shadows, the first drop of water landed on a shining steel electric kettle. Something was beginning to boil, not just water, but the quiet burning rage of a woman who once swore she would never share her husband with the past. The Accra morning blazed with sunlight, a cloudless sky sharp and gold. From above, the Kumi mansion gleamed like a jewel in Osu, a world where the wealthy lived far from the smell of sweat and charcoal that belonged to real life. But inside that shining palace, a storm was forming, not in the sky, but in the heart of a woman. Yara had been awake since dawn. She stood before the mirror, admiring herself in a silk blue gown, then glanced down at the letter on the table, a share transfer agreement from Gold Coast Oil. All it needed was Mama Adwa's signature, and 20% of Kofi's fortune would belong to her. But the old woman, frail, bent, her hands trembling, had simply shaken her head. "My son's wealth is not for sale, not for deceit." Those words fell like burning coal into Yara's pride. From that day, the respect in her eyes was replaced by quiet contempt. That morning, Kofi was leaving for Kumasi to meet investors. He kissed his wife lightly on the cheek and said, "Take care of Mama for me, okay?" Yara smiled, her lips curved sweetly, but her eyes were cold still. "Don't worry," she said softly. "I'll take good care of her." The door closed. The Bentley's engine faded into the distance. The house fell silent, only the antique clock ticking slowly, and the faint bubbling sound of the electric kettle in the kitchen. Mama Adwa sat by the window, trying to wheel herself toward the porch to catch a little sun. The weather had been kind lately. She wanted to dry her small blanket, the one that still carried the smell of balm and charcoal. She heard the echo of Yara's heels approaching. "Mama, why are you still using that old blanket?" "Because it's still warm, like Kofi's arms when he was little." Yara laughed a sharp, bitter sound. He's not that dirty old Fadama boy anymore. He's a man of high society. You should know your place. The sunlight caught the scar on Mama Adwawa's arm. It glowed red, like a memory that refused to fade. My dear, she said quietly, nobility isn't in marble walls. It's in the heart that still knows how to bow. Yara slammed a cloth onto the table. Enough. I'm done with the smell of ointment. Your morning prayers, your pitiful stories. Who do you think you are? Just because you're his mother, you think you own this house? Mama Adwa tried to wheel back, but the wheels caught on the thick carpet. Yara stepped closer, hands trembling, eyes burning with hate. You won't sign the papers. Fine. Maybe you need a little lesson to learn who really owns this place. She turned, yanked the plug from the kettle. Steam burst out violently, swirling in the air like a brewing storm. Yara. The old woman's voice quivered. Don't do this. Shut up. Yara lifted the kettle. The steam curled upward, glinting white in the sunlight. And then, splash. Boiling water poured down. A scream ripped through the room. The frame filled with steam. Mama Adwoa's body recoiled, her hands trembling, clutching her shoulders, her dark skin blistering, turning red and raw. The kettle clattered to the floor, rolling across the marble as smoke rose from the boiling floor. Her eyes stayed open, not in hatred, but in pain and silent pleading. Yara stumbled back, panting, her hands shaking, but her eyes glimmered with a sick, victorious madness. You'll never dare say my name again. Never. The old woman reached out weakly, whispering, Child. And then the door burst open like thunder. Kofi stood there. He had cut short his flight, driven by an unshakable dread. He froze. Steam filled the room. The smell of burnt flesh choked the air. He saw his mother writhing in pain on the floor, his wife holding the empty kettle, steam still rising from her silk dress. Yara, he roared. Dear God, what have you done? He rushed forward, kneeling beside his mother, wrapping her in his jacket, tears falling like rain. Mama, Mama, it's me, Kofi. Her voice was faint. Don't hate her. I'll be fine. But when he turned, Yara stood frozen, her face pale, lips trembling. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to scare her. Scare her. Kofi's voice broke. You poured boiling water on the woman who gave me life. The room shattered with his scream. A wine glass fell and exploded on the marble floor, like the sound of a son's, heartbreaking as he watched his mother burn by the hands of the woman he once loved. He carried his mother in his arms and ran out into the rain. The sky opened. A craw poured, heavy, furious, punishing. Steam rose, merging with the rain, blurring the scene. In his arms, Mama Adwa whispered softly, Son, never let your kindness boil like this water. The Bentley sped off into the storm, its taillights fading in the downpour. Behind them, the lights of the mansion went dark. By the window, Yara fell to her knees, clutching her head, her sobs mixed with thunder, and no one could tell whether it was remorse or the fear of the price she would soon pay. The rain kept falling. Each drop struck the hospital windows of Accra General, like the knocking of a guilty conscience. Inside the recovery room, the smell of antiseptic mixed with the faint haunting scent of burnt skin, the memory of boiling water still clinging to everyone who had witnessed it. Mama Adwa lay motionless, half her body wrapped in white bandages. Her face was strewn with tears, though her lips made no sound. Beside her bed, Kofi sat, gripping her hand tightly, his voice hoarse and trembling. Mama, I called the police. Yara will pay for this, I swear. But she closed her eyes, her voice fragile, barely more than breath. No, my son, don't let mercy become a blade. Forgiveness is the only road that will let your soul rest. He tightened his grip, eyes red. Mama, she tried to kill you. How can you defend her? Because you once loved her, my son, and because I don't want you to lose your soul. Outside in the hallway, reporters whispered and cameras clicked. The headlines had already gone viral. Oil tycoon Kofi Kumi in family scandal. Mother scalded by daughter-in-law. The hospital gates were crowded with flashing cameras, and through every lens, the image of a son sitting silently beside his burned mother became the portrait of divine retribution. But inside Kofi's heart, something else was boiling down. He couldn't understand why his gentle mother kept pleading for mercy for the woman who had nearly killed her. Something didn't add up. 3 days later, Kofi returned to the mansion with Inspector Gagnon. The rain had stopped, but moisture still clung to the walls. The house felt cold, empty, and heavy. He walked slowly through the hallway, past the place where voices once shouted, and stopped at the electric kettle, still bearing the mark of burned metal. The inspector opened his laptop, connecting to the hard drive from the security cameras. The screen flickered to life. "Let's see what really happened," he said. The footage began to play. At first it looked ordinary Yara entering the room. Mama Adwa sitting by the window. But when the playback slowed, the truth emerged. Yara had deliberately unplugged the kettle and poured the boiling water. It wasn't an accident. In that moment, as the water fell, Mama Adwa didn't raise her hand to shield herself. She reached up to protect a framed photo of her son on the table, shielding it from the water. Kofi froze. His blood felt like ice. He stared at the screen and then broke down, sobbing. She really tried to kill my mother." Inspector Gagnon nodded gravely. "We'll press charges, but there's one more thing you should see." He played the final seconds of the recording. After Kofi carried his mother out, Yara collapsed to the floor, clutching her head, muttering, "I just wanted her to sign, just sign." Then she hurled the contract papers across the floor, the documents that would have transferred Kofi's company shares into her name. Kofi closed his eyes, tears spilling down his trembling hands. "I brought ambition into my home, and it burned my mother." When Mama Adwa awoke, she looked at her son. The warm hospital light reflected off her wrinkled face, each line erode carved by time. "My son," she whispered, "don't let anger drag you down. Rebuild, but with compassion." He held her hand, voice breaking. "Mama, I saw everything. You were betrayed. What should I do? Turn your pain into light, my child. Don't burn anyone else. Only those who forgive are truly strong." That evening, Yara was arrested. The media swarmed the station, cameras flashing. But when she saw her husband, she broke down crying. "Kofi, I just wanted you to love me like you love your mother. I was afraid you'd leave me." He looked at her tired hollow, emptied of rage. "You left yourself behind the moment you poured that first drop." A wind carried the fresh scent of rain-soaked earth. Kofi sat beside her, holding a purple orchid pot from the mansion. "I brought this from the house. I want to replant it this time in real soil." She smiled, eyes gentle. "Good, because flowers only live when their roots are true, just like people." He nodded, gazing at the setting sun. "I'll sell all my shares, Mama. I'll use the money to start a charity in your name, the Adwa Foundation, to help abused mothers and disabled women. And I'll go back to Old Fadama, rebuild the old bridge you once pushed your charcoal cart across." Her eyes filled with tears, her smile peaceful. "Now I know my son has truly come home." Breaking news. Oil tycoon Kofi Kumi resigns from Gold Coast Oil, launches foundation for poor women and the disabled. Trial for Yara Kumi set for next week. And in a small wooden house in Old Fadama, people hung a black and white photo of Mama Adwa with the words written beneath. "Forgiveness is the fire that purifies the soul." Then the drums began to beat slowly as the narrator's voice faded. Some burns heal on the skin, but others burn deep in the heart, and only love can soothe them. And, when the boiling water cools, we finally see who truly carries the warmest heart. That morning, Accra was cloaked in a heavy gray stillness. The clouds hung low and swollen, as if ready to wash the city clean or drown it in memory. The wind swept through the palms outside the High Court gates, carrying with it the damp scent of earth, the scent of something about to end or begin anew. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered, reporters jostled, cameras flashed like lightning. On the marble sign at the entrance, the words State versus Yarakumi were engraved like a cold knife against stone. People called it the trial of conscience. Inside, the air was thick. Kofi entered in a black suit, face calm, but eyes shadowed with depth. Across the room sat Yara, dressed in a gray prison uniform. Her once perfect hair hung loose, her beauty faded into pale fear. She had once been the darling of Accra high society. Now she was merely the echo of a woman. The judge struck the gavel, crack, a sound like thunder before a storm. The prosecutor read the charge, intentional infliction of grievous bodily harm upon a disabled person. Photographs of Mama Adwa's burns flashed on the screen. Several people turned away, unable to look. Kofi did not, but his eyes shimmered with restrained tears. When it was Yara's turn to speak, her voice trembled. "I didn't want to kill her," she said, her tone raw and hoarse-low. "I just wanted her to sign. I was afraid of losing everything. I was afraid he loved her more than he loved me." Her voice cracked, echoing in the silent room. "I was jealous of my husband's mother, and now I know that's the most insane thing I've ever done." A single tear rolled down her wrist, tracing the chain of cold steel that bound her hands. The judge turned to Kofi. "Mr. Kofi Kumi, do you wish to address the court?" Kofi rose slowly. His voice was steady, not bitter, only worn smooth by grief. "I no longer call myself a billionaire," he began. "I am just a failed son, one who let greed enter his home before he did." He paused, then looked toward Yara. "I once loved her, and I still believe that somewhere inside her was a good wife, but power and ambition, they boil the human heart faster than water in an electric kettle." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Cameras flashed again, but Kofi didn't flinch. He turned to the judge. "My mother is still alive. She told me, forgiveness isn't about who deserves it. It's about freeing your own soul so you can live again. Today, I choose to listen to my mother." The judge studied him for a long moment, then raised the gavel again. The sound rang out softer this time. "The defendant, Yarakumi, is hereby sentenced to 8 years imprisonment for grievous bodily harm. However, in light of the victim's plea for leniency, the sentence is reduced to 5 years. Yara collapsed, not from relief, but from the weight of her own ruin. She wept silently, her body shaking like a broken statue. Kofi did not turn away. He stepped forward, placed his hand over his heart, and bowed not to the guilty wife, but to the lesson life had carved into his soul. When he left the courthouse, the sky opened, not with thunder, but with slow, heavy raindrops, falling like forgiveness. People lined the street in silence. An old woman selling roasted corn whispered, "Accra weeps today for the children who forget their mothers." Kofi lifted his face, letting the rain fall freely. Through the haze, he saw at Mama Adwa's face by the charcoal fire, smiling softly through smoke. His voice broke as he whispered into the storm, "Mama, I understand now. This rain is your forgiveness." That evening, he returned to the hospital. His mother sat by the window, wrapped in a shawl, eyes gazing into the fading light. The reflection of dusk danced across her wrinkled face, but her eyes glowed with peace. "You went to court?" she asked. "Yes, Mama. She'll serve her sentence." She nodded gently. "And you, my son, you'll serve yours by learning to live rightly." He knelt, taking her hands, pressing his forehead to her knees. The rain still fell outside, each drop striking the metal railing like the ticking of time. She smiled. Do you hear it? Akra. Rain has its own rhythm. It doesn't judge. It only washes clean. 3 months later, when the rainy season ended, the Adwa Foundation was inaugurated in Old Fadama. A small bridge crossed the canal, its name carved into a golden plate. Mama's Bridge. People gathered like it was a festival. Mothers with crutches, children laughing. Drummers beating joy into the air. Kofi stood on the bridge beside his mother, now stronger, her silver hair shining in the sunlight. He whispered almost to the wind. The day that boiling water spilled, I thought my world had ended. But that was the day I was born again. Old Fadama glowed under the bronze dusk. The tin rooftops shimmered like coins of fire. Drums of the Yoruba echoed through the canals, joined by the voices of women singing. Adwa, Mama Adwa, your tears have made the earth green again. That morning, the Accra sun rose late, casting soft golden rays across the shimmering waters of Old Fadama. A thin mist floated over the floating village, like a white veil laid gently upon the waking gay. The sound of paddles cutting through the river, children's laughter and vendors' calls, wove together into the melody of a new dawn. Amid that rhythm of life stood a newly built wooden bridge, Mama's Bridge. On its bronze plaque, the words gleamed in the sunlight. Adwoa Foundation for the mothers who burned so we could shine. Beneath the bridge, Kofi Kumi stood still. He no longer wore black suits or gold watches. Only a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands roughened after months of work beside carpenters and masons. His hair was dusted with mist, his eyes deep but peaceful. Behind him, Mama Adwoa sat in a new wheelchair, draped in her purple shawl. The morning light reflected on her face, revealing that tender smile. The one that had once endured pain, offered forgiveness, and proved that boiling water could burn flesh, but never the soul. You did it, my son, she said softly. This bridge doesn't just connect two sides of Old Fadama. It reconnects hearts. No, Mama Kofi smiled, kneeling beside her. You built it long ago. I only finished the dream you began. The wind stirred, fluttering the purple ribbons tied along the railing. A group of schoolchildren walked across, dressed in clean white uniforms, each holding a paper flower. They bowed to the old woman, and she smiled, raising her wrinkled hand to bless them. From afar, the church bells rang. Mama Adwoa tilted her head slightly toward the rising sun and whispered, All gave us water to wash clean, but only the heart can make it pure. Kofi said nothing. He knew he would never forget the hiss of that boiling water, yet he had learned not to let it scorch him again. He had learned how to turn fire into light. By evening, when the ceremony ended, the river breeze carried the scent of woodsome smoke and the voices of Old Fadama's women. Adwa, don't cry anymore. Your tears have turned into a bridge. Mama Adwa sat quietly, her frail hand clasped in her son's. The sunset spread gold across the water. She gazed into the distance where the floating houses faded into the twilight haze, and said softly, My son, I'm tired now. If tomorrow I'm no longer here, don't cry. I've seen you come home to yourself. That's enough. Kofi held her hand tighter, unable to speak, afraid that if he did, his tears would fall. She leaned her head back, smiling as if drifting into gentle sleep, the last rays of sunlight crowning her hair like a quiet halo. That night, the Old Fadama sky was crystal clear. Stars hung thick and bright like diamonds scattered across the river. People later said that near midnight, the wind rose and the faint scent of lavender from the old hospital garden drifted toward the water. And the next morning, Kofi was found sitting alone on the bridge, his mother's purple shawl resting beside him, light as a final farewell. Years later, the Ajwa Foundation had become a symbol of compassion. It didn't just aid abused mothers. It taught their children how to love, how not to let wealth boil away their hearts. Every dawn, Kofi came to water the purple orchids that bloomed by the foundation's entrance. He no longer stood on podiums, no longer appeared on Ford's covers, but in Old Fadama, people called him the Son of Water. One day, a young journalist asked, "Sir, what made you give up all that wealth?" Kofi looked out at the river where children splashed and laughed and smiled. "Because I learned that money can buy perfume, but it can't hide the smell of guilt. Only gratitude makes life truly fragrant." That afternoon, the sky turned gray again. A sudden rainstorm swept through the village, soaking his hair. But he didn't run. He stood on Mama's bridge, arms open, letting the rain wash away the last ashes inside his heart. And through the falling rain, he could almost hear his mother's voice carried by the wind. "My son, forgiveness is the only path that keeps the heart warm." He smiled and looked up. A faint rainbow had appeared over the Old Fadama horizon, brief but radiant enough to light up the entire scene. The raindrops on the railing sparkled like diamonds, reflecting Kofi's face, peaceful, free, and real. You've just watched a true story about the power of a mother's love and the grace of forgiveness. A single drop of boiling water can burn the skin, but it's greed and ingratitude that truly burn the soul. Share your thoughts if you've ever had a mother who sacrificed her life for you. Write in the comments below. Thank you, Mom, and the city or country where you're watching from. What would you do if one day you came home and saw the person you love hurting your own mother? Leave your comment, because every word you write becomes a reminder that a mother's love can't be measured by money, and forgiveness is the only road that leads us back to being human. Don't forget, like this video to help spread the message of gratitude and filial love. Share it so more people can discover African tales. The rain in Accra washed away the ashes. But only when we bow our heads before our mothers does life truly become pure again. Subscribe to Tales by TTL for more real stories of mothers' humanity and redemption.